I used to have a theater company back in the old days called Turtle Gals. Myself, Janny Lozon, and Monique Mojica, both veteran theater and film artists. And we were in Fort Frances in 2001, and we were teaching a theater workshop there, and we were supposed to perform a work-in-progress presentation for the community. And we were on our way, we were in a van, on our way to the venue or something, and we saw the street sign. And we like literally, the three of us just kind of screamed in the van, like, "Stop the van!" And our lovely driver, who's lived in Fort Frances her entire life, was like, "Why?" And we pulled over and we had her take pictures of us in front of the street sign, and she was just completely baffled. Like, why would you want to? She didn't get it. And we asked people the rest of the time that we were there, like, what the hell is wrong with this street sign? And Native and non-Native people were like, well, I live on Colonization Road. Well, I grew up on Colonization Road. Well, it's just the main drag. Like, nobody really had an issue with it. And we thought that was really weird, because we had gone up there, before we left to go up there, we had heard that there was racial tension between the First Nations population and the settler town folk. Couchiching First Nation is right there. Colonization Road starts on Couchiching. And we were like, but can't you guys see that maybe that's the reason? So we worked a reference of the road into the presentation we gave, and it actually got a response, and people started talking, and obviously the road is still named that, so nothing really had changed. But over time, I think there's been a lot of discussion amongst folks in the community about what that word means now that people are more aware of it. So Ryan grew up there, and flash forward to the show that we were in the process of writing at that time. We produced it in Toronto in 2002. Ryan came to see the show, and that photo of us standing in front of the street sign was in our lobby display, and he saw the photo, and I ran into him a few weeks later, and he was like, mind blown. He was like, I grew up there my whole life. Literally everything he says, I played on that road, I swam off that road. He's like, how did I get to be, whatever age he was at the time, how did I get to be this old? And I never thought about it. So we wanted to do a theater piece about Colonization Road, and he was going to be involved in that in some way. And it just didn't happen, just scheduling and stuff. And then time went on, and we ended up sort of going our separate ways as a company, pursuing our solo projects. And the project stayed in my mind for years. I sort of just sat dormant, and I wanted to kind of revision it and take it out of a theater realm. And I thought it would be a good doc, because then you could get into a little bit more of the detail, and more people might see it than your standard theater production, where you're lucky if 40 people show up on a given night. So, man, the film is kind of open-ended for that very reason, right? Because I feel many things about it. I would say I'm personally way more cautious than I am optimistic. I want to be hopeful. I'm skeptical. I think that reconciliation is, it's maybe the wrong word, because it kind of implies that there was a good relationship at some point. And at some point, it wasn't, there were different times, and different things happened at different times as Europeans came over and moved their way west. There were trade relationships. There were things that came out of those relationships, like the Métis Nation, that kind of proved that there can be some really a relationship. But I feel like a lot of Indigenous people are really tired. It's not our burden to carry. And I feel like that's the challenge to Canadians, that it's time for y'all to pick it up. So if there can be reconciliation, I think it's your move. You know? Yeah. So Shoal Lake has been in the news a lot, so a lot of you probably have heard about Shoal Lake, which is great. For many, many years, nobody knew about Shoal Lake, and they were, it took a lot. What we filmed in the film was called The Price of Water. That was an event that they held on July 9th in 2014. It was the first time the media came to Shoal Lake to actually see what was happening, how they lived. And we were fortunate to spend a few days there. As of last December, the commitment for the funding was made. There have been many things that have obstacles to climb for that funding to be released and for the process of building the road to actually happen. And from what I most recently heard, they are planning to break ground this winter. They have to do it in the winter, which is insane, but it's because there is a winter access road. And it's the only way that they can get the machinery and the big trucks and the gravel and all of that into anywhere near where it has to start. So it would be a lot easier if it was in the summer, but it's not possible. And so I think there's still a lot of red tape and some machinations that have to happen in order for the funding to flow properly and for the rollout of it all. But we'll probably start to hear more about that in the next 3 months or so. Fingers crossed. It's a good question. I don't know that I have the practical answers. I think in some ways where for us it's about kind of reconciling the damage that's been done and finding the hope and coming out of that for non-Indigenous folks, whether you're of European descent and your families have been here for 5 generations, or if you're new Canadians coming from other parts of the world. I think the most important thing is really knowing what the truth is, right? So it's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We can't even have a conversation about reconciliation until we actually know what the truth is. And there's so much, I think, that we've not been taught. I wasn't taught any of that, and I went to school in Toronto. And you're much younger than me, and you still haven't been taught that stuff. So I think one thing that maybe is a practical suggestion, if you're a student in a university, is to make them teach you. Demand that they teach you this truth. And don't just rely on white anthropologists or professors to be able to present that information. But I think it's time that education comes from an Indigenous voice. Because I remember very clearly that opening my history book in 4th grade and seeing a paragraph. And that was it. Like, we didn't exist. Nothing happened here. It's all smoke and mirrors. So, I mean, that's if you're informed, then you make different choices every day based on that knowledge that you then carry, right? So I think that might be a practical thing. But I think it's also an individual journey. And I think people have to ask themselves, what does it mean? And if you do know the truth, then what do you do with that? How do you walk through the world knowing more than you knew before? And we're hoping to find some funding to build an interactive website that can be for students, that can sort of serve like a study guide, but for people who are not students who see the film or who come across the website can, sort of travel down that road and you want to know more about treaties, or do you want to know more about language reclamation that's happening in certain areas and cultural revitalization that's happening in certain areas that have been hard hit by colonization. So there are opportunities, I hope, in the future, with the film getting out there, but then also a kind of installation, online installation for people to always refer to. Some folks feel like it does us a disservice to change the name, because then we whitewash it. Then it doesn't exist anymore. It's out of sight, out of mind. And so if Fort Frances or Kenora or Dryden or whatever town has a sign that says that, if they want to, they're going to have to duke it out and figure out what works for them, right? And I see both sides of that argument. Because I also feel like, every road that's named for a colonist is just as toxic as a road that's called Colonization Road. So if we're going to have that bigger discussion, then we need to do what, Ogima McCanna Project in Toronto is doing. Hayden King, who's in the film, and Susan Blight, they've been renaming roads in Toronto, the Indigenous names for what were once trails, or the areas that those roads are in. That's starting to happen. We're seeing billboards around Toronto pop up in Anishinaabe, and people don't know what they say. Which, yes, and all of the 9 hidden rivers in Toronto and all of their tributaries that we have plunked ourselves on top of. So that sort of re-indigenizing the space is maybe more potent than just changing the name of a road. You know what I mean? So I think that's the discussion that's happening, and maybe will continue, hopefully, in those places.